Bella Ramsey has come out as gender fluid and non-binary. In an interview with the New York Times, the young star, who is set to have a breakout role as Ellie in HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us, recently revealed that they are on the transgender identity spectrum. Per Ramsey's interview, "I guess my gender has always been very fluid. Someone would call me she or her and I would not think about it. But I knew that if someone called me he, it was a bit exciting." End quote. Ramsey also addressed their pronouns, stating that they don't care how people address them, but does check the non-binary option when filling out forms. To quote, "I'm very much just a person. Being gendered is not something that I particularly like, but in terms of pronouns, I really couldn't care less." End quote. This is cool news. By coming out, Ramsey, who I'm going to refer to with they, them pronouns throughout this video due to how they said that they do not like being gendered, is acknowledging an important aspect of their identity that they had locked away from the public eye, and they can now live more comfortably knowing that the public knows their authentic selves. Additionally, it's great representation. Speaking as a trans person myself, she, her, it's always awesome to see other very public and out trans people, whether binary or not, who are successful and thriving, because it's something that gives hope to the rest of us, that people like us can be notable figures despite how we are often pushed to society's margins, that people like us can succeed all while being open about our identities. It's wonderful. However, it is important to note that many folks do not share my enthusiasm, mostly due to a general sense of ignorance on the subject matter. Some people don't know what it means to be gender fluid or non-binary. Some folks believe that Ramsey is only claiming to be non-binary and gender fluid for the attention, or they could believe that Ramsey coming out isn't that big of a deal, or that it shouldn't be public knowledge, or even need to be newsworthy. But these people are wrong, and today's episode is going to argue why these viewpoints against Ramsey and LGBTQ people as a whole are incorrect. While sure, normally I'd refer to people that deny the humanity of trans folks and LGBTQ people as I'm trying a different tact here, because sure, most folks against trans identity and such will laugh at me, leave a dislike rating that also serves as a form of engagement that boosts my channel and video within the almighty YouTube algorithm, may the content last forever, and then fuck off, but this video is not for them. It's for folks who are curious about trans identity, but don't really have the knowledge to really discuss or understand trans subject matter. It's for people who actually have open minds and are willing to hear a more nuanced perspective than just the usual anti-trans talking points like chromosomes never lie and such. And with that, I want to highlight why Ramsey going public about their identity is a noteworthy occasion, why it is worthy of being news. And to begin, let's start by defining gender fluid identities, non-binary identities, and transgender identities as a whole. See, the majority of trans people identify on the gender binary. For transgender men, their sex assigned at birth was female, but they identify as male. And for trans women like myself, our sex assigned at birth was male, but we identify as female, because we all are the true ruination of gender reveal parties. But non-binary and gender fluid identities, among others, are alternate yet still 100% valid identities that actually prove that gender identity is a spectrum more so than a seemingly simplistic gender binary. According to the Oxford Dictionary, non-binary gender identity means denoting, having, or relating to a gender identity that does not conform to the traditional binary beliefs about gender, which indicate that all individuals are exclusively either male or female. And gender fluid identity is defined as denoting or relating to a person who does not identify as having a single unchanging gender, which means that a gender fluid person's gender identity is whatever they feel is true to their identity at the moment, something that is different from most trans people who are comfortable just transitioning and remaining as women, men, non-binary, or other genders. It's a little bit different. Now, many detractors of trans identity will say that transgender people, whether binary or not, are just a radical ideology and are a people who did not exist until recent history. After all, the word transgender wasn't a thing until the 1960s, the term gender fluid wasn't created until the 1990s, and the word non-binary, in its relation to gender identity at least, wasn't used until the 2000s. And with that, some folks believe that this era of people identifying as something other than their sex assigned at birth is just a fad, as if we are gay beanie babies or whatever is the most popular toy these days, because I don't know, I'm fucking old. But regardless, that's not the point. The point here is that many people believe that trans identity is a more recent phenomenon, that people like us did not exist in history. But here is the thing. The words transgender, gender fluid, and non-binary may have only just been recently invented, but that does not, however, mean that transgender, gender fluid, and non-binary people did not exist before that. In fact, we did exist before these terms were created. There are documented lives of people in the 1800s and the early 1900s who transitioned to a desired gender that differed from their sex assigned at birth. And additionally, there are many cultures throughout history that acknowledge that gender identity identity is a spectrum, and that some of their citizenry or tribe members were people that belonged in this category. We have always existed. Furthermore, people don't identify as a transgender identity due to it being a supposed modern-day trend. Because despite what some detractors might say, no one is doing this shit for cool points. Because if they did, they'd drop that shit quickly. Like me chucking a copy of Anthem into the trash where it belongs, because its family is there. It's just not something that would stick. See, being trans is hard. It's basically the Dark Souls of personal identities. And it is so for multiple reasons. Conservative pundits, politicians, and religious leaders spread fear and misinformation about us, even conflating us with pedophiles and groomers, and even needing litter boxes, because obviously, we the trans people need special poop pebbles to get the bowel juices flowing. Obviously. Government agencies, schools, and healthcare systems are often biased against trans folks. Sometimes family members either shame us and possibly disown us, and the ignorant public sometimes views trans people as being worthy of ridicule and to be laughed at. And with that, there is enough shame, hatred, ignorance, and such to go around that would make any person pretending to be trans to desist from that action quickly. They would stop. Yet documentedly, the vast overwhelming majority of trans people who transition, children or adults, don't detransition. And those who do detransition don't necessarily do that because they realize they are not trans. It's more that their living situation and being unaccepted by society has caused them to detransition, more so than the fact that they are questioning their gender identity. In other words, most trans people who transition don't detransition, and many that do detransition are still trans, meaning that identifying as a trans identity or transitioning has nothing to do with being trendy or such. These are real, lived, nuanced, and documented identities that exist. And this is true of Bella Ramsey as well. While I've seen people claim that Ramsey is just coming out as gender fluid and non-binary for the attention or because it's in vogue, like 80s nostalgia or America's embracement of fascist ideologies, the more likely reality is that Ramsey has grappled and questioned with their gender identity for a while. That's before coming out, Ramsey spent a lot of time in self-reflection. And Ramsey decided to come out as being non-binary and gender fluid, even despite how hostile the world is towards trans folks, because make no mistake, the world is oftentimes cruel to out trans people, and thus Ramsey is taking a risk by just coming out, if not just to their own person, then possibly to their future acting career. Because let's be honest, just 10 years ago, there was a significant discrimination and biases against casting queer folks in this business. And while things have improved, there's still a long way to go, seeing as non-LGBTQ actors are still cast in LGBTQ roles instead of queer people themselves. And then there's the fact that LGBTQ folks are often typecast, meaning that there are potential repercussions to coming out. There are many career reasons that could have made Ramsey stay in the closet, yet they still came out anyway, proving that Ramsey did not do this for the attention. They came out because it's who they are. So we have covered that there are various gender identities that exist across a spectrum, and that Bella Ramsey is one of these folks. Yet there's still the question about whether or not it's worth sharing. There is a question of whether or not it is newsworthy. And to answer, Bella Ramsey, and by extension when other LGBTQ actors come out, is indeed worthy of a news bulletin. And it is so for a couple of reasons. Firstly, coming out lets LGBTQ people control the narrative of their lives, particularly when it comes to the threat of being outed. See, being outed is a problem and a rational fear that LGBTQ folks face. Historically speaking, many queer people hide their sexual and gender identities from the public for various valid reasons like fear of reprisals, not being ready to share their truth, and etc. And as a result, these queer folks may share their identity to a close few people or hide it completely. Yet some folks weaponize our identities, threatening to share and out us before we are ready, taking the control of our narratives from us. And we saw this somewhat recently with Rebel Wilson. See, Rebel Wilson is in a relationship with a woman, yet she originally wanted to keep that under wraps. She wanted to keep that a secret because she wasn't ready to share that yet. But when Wilson learned that the Sydney Morning Herald was going to report on her relationship, pricks, Wilson was forced to come out. Her control over her life was taken from her, and that's not okay. That's awful. On the Sydney Morning Herald's part, it was a move even more soulless than a Square Enix New Year's resolution. It is something that should not happen in today's environment, yet it does occur. Our own identities can be weaponized against us, sometimes by news outlets chomping at the bit for a news story, you fucking vultures, or by other people with an axe to grind. And that's one reason as to why actors and actresses coming out as LGBTQ is indeed newsworthy. While many people say that coming out as LGBTQ isn't news, the times where we are outed publicly prove that being LGBTQ is a big deal and carries weight, because if it didn't, assholes wouldn't threaten to out us. Fuck you, Sydney Morning Herald. And thus, Bella Ramsey coming out is news. While Ramsey wasn't outed, they were, however, in the closet, and when in the closet, speaking from experience, there's always a fear that our secret identity could become public knowledge before we are ready to share. There's always a fear that we'd have to Iron Man that shit before we are ready. And thankfully, Ramsey was able to come out on their own terms. Unlike people who have been outed, they had control over their coming out narrative. The second reason as to why Bella Ramsey stepping outside the closet is noteworthy is due to trans identity in general. See, trans identity is a little bit more involved than sexual identity. While being gay, lesbian, and bisexual is a big aspect of one's personhood, trans identity goes deeper. Gender identity defines how you want to be seen, how you want to appear, and how you want to be addressed. It's a very defining part of us, because being misgendered, dead-named, and overall denied our own true and valid identity hurts. It's not fun. It's more painful than defecating cinnamon light, and thus many trans people overall strive to correct this when coming out. We inform others of our identities in the hopes that people will respect our truths, that we want people to refer to us as the person that we know ourselves to be. And this is true of Bella Ramsey as well, especially considering that they are a public figure. While we, the public, don't know if they experience dysphoria and such, Ramsey letting us know how they desire to be addressed is a big deal, mostly because they are a television star who is about to hit it big with HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us. And while sure you might know Ramsey as the voice of Hilda, or as just being one of the few positive features of the later Game of Thrones seasons, because Lyanna Mormont is a boss, The Last of Us is a show that has scored great critical ratings and watch audience, all while Ramsey is a co-lead. So if anything, Ramsey is about to strike gold. And seeing as more people know about Ramsey now, Ramsey's coming out is newsworthy because it changes the way in which they desire to be addressed and referred as. And yes, I know that Ramsey said that they couldn't care less what pronouns people refer to them as, but it is clear by them coming out, their identity goes beyond the binary static option of just being she, her. They can be a he, him, they, them, or any other potential gender under the sun. And overall, Ramsey's announcement changes how we, the public, view them as a person, at least in regards of their gender identity. It alters the way in which the public will approach Ramsey's identity in the future. It is important, and that's ultimately why Bella Ramsey's coming out is noteworthy. While sure, it's pretty cool to see more people under the trans identity umbrella having success in Hollywood alone, the real reason as to why Ramsey's identity is newsworthy is because it changes the way that we approach their identity, and that they came out in a way that was under their control of their own personhood and narrative. Ramsey was able to do this on their own terms, which is ultimately a good thing. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you think of Bella Ramsey and them coming out. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto this credit sequence, and $5 a month allows you to start making quick review requests. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in Samantha Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.